Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 43 from book 5 of Caesar's De Bello Gallico. So remember, at this point in the narrative, we're right in the middle of the Gallic Wars. We've seen that one of the forts that the Romans are using in the land of the Eburones for the winter in 54 BC has been attacked. That army's been wiped out, Sabinus and Cotta, and at this point we've moved on to Cicero's fort, where the Nervi, right, have been kind of roused to rebellion by Ambiorix, and now they've come to the camp of Cicero. They tried the same trick to lure him out. They've already attacked, and now they've been attacking for a few days. And as we've seen, the Romans are still kind of standing tall, right? They're still holding out. They're defending themselves. And at this point in the narrative, you're going to see a particular attention played to the centurions of the Roman army, the leaders, as they fight back this attack by the Nervi, right? And we've been saying that the reason it's particularly devastating is the Nervi have captured Roman soldiers. They learned siege tactics by, kind of interrogating these prisoners and watching the Romans, and now they're using them against them. So it's an interesting part of the narrative where we're starting to get more into a little bit more military as there's a battle going on, and Caesar's kind of describing the tactics used, things like that. But we are in the middle of the siege, and this is where we're going to pick up, right, as the narrative continues. But before we dive in, like I always tell you, whenever you get to, trying to read anything in Latin, the first thing that you want to do is just make sure that you've got all the vocab down. So you want to try to find, as best you can, any vocab list. There's a bunch out there when it comes to Caesar, right, just because it's so well known and it's been taught in schools forever. So go to like Quizlet or something, get a list for this chapter, or make your own. But one way or another, you always want to start by making sure you have the vocab down, because it's just hard to understand what's going on if you don't know what the words mean. So start there. The other thing you want to do is read it aloud, right? I always say this. I know most of the time Caesar is read in AP classes, and there's not a ton of time. But if you can read it aloud and have a classmate read it back to you, you always want to try to work on your pronunciation and your speaking as well as your listening skills. It's really important to bring the language to life. And you never know, you might be more of like an auditory learner, someone who just needs to hear something instead of just reading it in your own head. So I'd always recommend that you try that, bring the language to life. If you can find a little bit of time, it's definitely worth it. Now, the other thing that I always say you should do is when it comes time to translating, try the read and reread method. I say this all the time, but it is the best way to actually lock it into your long-term memory. You want to read this chapter once, write down any problem areas you have. When you're done with the first read, try to fix them. Use a commentary, anything you can find to try to shore up where you went wrong. If it's individual words, it's kind of easy. You can just look them up with like an online dictionary, something like that. But you try to figure out where you went wrong and fix those problems. And you just keep repeating that process over and over again until you can go start to finish through this chapter without too many problems. That'll lock it into your long-term memory. So you're actually remembering this stuff. And again, I know a lot of you are trying to prep for the AP test. There's a lot of material. There's way too much material. And you're never going to remember everything you did when it comes time for the test, especially if you're just reading it once and looking at a translation and getting the gist without actually diving in. You're much better off trying to lock it long-term. And like I said, that's where read and reread will really help you. Okay? But one way or another, do that prep work. Pause the video if you have it. And now what we're going to do is just walk through this chapter together and try to explain it as we go. Okay? So the chapter starts like this. You have septimo oppugnationes die maximo corto vento ferventes fusili ex argilla glandes fundis et fervevacta iacula in casas quae more Gallico stramentis erant tectae iacere coiperunt. Okay, so there you get to hear it a little bit. My pronunciation, again, never anything fantastic, but at least you get to hear it. So we're starting with septimo die, right? On the seventh day, right? So you have the ordinal number there, septimo, on the seventh day of the siege, oppugnationes, right? So this has been going on for a week, right? They've been fighting and they've been besieged. Then you have the ablative absolute here. So you have with the great wind or greatest wind having arisen. So maximo corto vento, right? So this wind kicks up. Okay, so when this is happening in the background, what happens? Well, you have to go all the way to the end to kind of understand where the main verb is. It's iacere coiperunt, right? That complementary infinitive. They began to throw. And it's talking, it's talking about the Gauls, the Nervi here, right? So they started to throw ferventes, right? Ferventes glandes. So the ferventes there means like glowing, kind of like burning, right, is one way to do it. Glandes are sling bullets, right? So when we translate bullets here, we're talking about the small little stones that you put in a sling. So the Gauls start chucking red hot sling bullets, and then you have ex argilla fusili, right? They're made from molten clay is really how you want to do it. The fusili again is usually translated molten. You'll see in like commentaries, it's that glowing red hot description, argilla, again made of clay, right? From the slings, fundis. So they start chucking these sling bullets. That are red hot, and the heat is really the point, right? So the wind kicks up, and now the Gauls are taking their sling bullets and they're heating them up over a fire before they toss them. So there's a reason for this. It's not necessarily to kill people, although getting hit with something that's burning hot would be, pretty devastating, especially if it gets behind your armor. Remember, the Romans are wearing armor a lot of times, whether it be chainmail or whatever it might be. You don't want that going behind and sticking to your skin. Not a good day. But they're also throwing ferrefacta jacula, so heated javelins, right? Javelins that have been heated up. And they're throwing these in casas, into the huts, right, of the fort. So why are they doing this? Well, it's here. They're doing this because you have quae more, the huts, which era tectae, they had been covered in the more Gallico, right, in the Gallic custom stramentis, with straw. So the Gauls know that the Romans have built this fort to be like a sort of a temporary winter fort. It's a lot of wood and it's got straw on top. So the Romans are not making this out of stone. So now you have red hot sling bullets and heated javelins landing onto straw roofs. It's going to light on fire, and that's the point. And the wind you're going to see is also a problem too. If you have wind blowing fire around, this is not going to be a good day. So the Gauls start throwing basically heated projectiles into the Roman fort, and they're hoping to light everything on fire now that this has been dragging for 7 days. Okay, and now we see that's exactly what happened. You have high celerite ignem comprehenderunt et venti magnitudine in omnem locum castrorum distulerunt. So these, meaning the huts, the casas from the previous line, these quickly caught fire, ignem comprehenderunt, right? So they caught fire, right? And not only that, but the winds, right? The winds distulerant, they carried the flames, right? They carried the fire. Now, why did they do this? You have magnitudine there, right? So it's going to explain it. So the winds, and this is a ablative of cause, is probably how you describe it. But because of the magnitude, right, their magnitude of the winds, they carried it in omnem locum castrorum, into every place of the camp. So the visual you want to have here is that the Gauls light the camp on fire, part of it with these heated sling bullets hitting straw, and then the wind starts spreading the fire all over the place. So now the Romans are in a really tough spot because their camp is on fire, right, which is not good. So the fire element introduced 7 days into the siege is a different one, and something that now the Romans have a real problem with. Okay? So now it continues. You have hostes, maximo clamore, secuti parta jam atque explorata, victoria, tures testudinesque, agre et scalis valam ascendere coiperunt. Okay, so we're talking about the enemy, hostes, right? So the enemy here, meaning the Nervi, the Gauls, right? With a great shout. Okay, so maximo clamore. So with a great shout, they start doing something. And then we have secuti here, right, which means as if, right? So we're getting an interesting description. So the description really goes to the ablative absolute here. So you have parta explorata victoria. Okay, so we have something going on with victory. So it says that they gave a great shout as if with victory already, right? Yam, already having been like produced, parta, right? Is kind of one way to do it. You see in different commentaries. I believe it's coming from pare, which means like to give birth to. So it had been, I guess, produced is kind of the best way to do it. It's produced, and explorata, right? So with victory already having been produced and kind of confirmed or established is one way to do it, from exploro. So in other words, they're giving a shout as if they already have victory, right? So as if victory already was produced and confirmed. So they start shouting like, hey, we did it, right? So here come the Gauls. Okay, what do? They coiperant, they began, right, to do two things. You have two complementary infinitives here. They began to agere and they began to ascendere. So agere is to drive up. So they began to push up the tures, their turrets, and their testudines, their tortoises, right? So you want to remember the tortoise is talking about the like wooden shields you would put up to block arrows as the infantry marches up, right? And the turrets are probably talking about like siege towers, right? Remember, these are Roman tactics that the Nervi have adapted. So they start rolling up siege towers. They're putting up their kind of wooden or wicker shields to protect the infantry. And not only that, but they began to ascendere wallum. They began to climb the wall, scalis, with ladders, right? So they're coming with ladders. They're coming with turrets, tortoises, everything, because now's like this final push as they think that victory is at hand because they're lighting the Roman camp on fire, right? So this line in particular gives you this great insight into not only how the siege is progressing, but the mindset of the Gauls. They think they've won, right? And Caesar wants you to know that. Then it continues. You have tanta militum virtus atque ea praesentia animi fuit ut cum undique flamma torrentur maximaque telorum multitudine premerentur suaque omnia impedimenta atque omnas fortunas conflagrare intellegerent right? So we have a long line here, this cum clause, right? But we have we'll unpack it kind of in pieces here. But you have so great, right? Tanta, but so great in the face of this. So great was the virtus militum, the virtue, the courage of the soldiers, and the praesentia animi, the presence or their presence of mind, right? It was so great, their courage and presence of mind, that although, right, and we kind of start this this cum clause here of everything going on, right? And it's probably a concessive cum clause here, so although kind of works. But you'd say, although on all sides, torrerento, right? They're scorched by flame, flamma, right? So everything's on fire, right? And not only are they being scorched by the flames on all sides, but they're being premerentor. We've seen that word before in Caesar, like kind of pressed or kind of crushed down, right? Pressed by the multitude, the greatest multitude, maxima multitudine, the greatest multitude or number of weapons, telorum. So it's saying they're being pressed on all sides. They're getting scorched by this flame, right? The fire that's going on behind them. And they're having all these weapons shot at them. And in the face of that, the Roman soldiers' kind of virtue and courage and their presence of mind, it was so good that, right, we're going to have this result clause coming in a little bit. But they not only are they being pressed, but they understood, right, intellegerant, you have this indirect statement here, but they understood that all their impedimenta, so suaque omnia impedimenta, all their baggage, right? The impedimenta is the stuff you'd carry with you as a soldier, so all their belongings, basically, and omnes fortunas, right? All their fortunes, their personal items, their stuff, right? Everything they've collected on the way, they understood that it was burning, right? Conflagrare. So they understood that, we're being attacked, everything's on fire, we're being burnt, there's weapons, and oh, by the way, all my stuff is lighting on fire, right? So in the face of all that, which Caesar's trying to tell you would probably break any other army, right, other soldiers, what did they do? Well, you have to go on to the next slide, and now we continue it to kind of get the end here. You have non modo demigrandi causa de vallo decedere nemo, sed paene ne respiceret quidem quisquam actum omnes acerrime fortissimeque pugnarent, right? So in the face of all this, fires, burning, weapons, all their stuff being lit on fire, right? Sounds horrible. You have not only, right, for the sake, the causa demigrandi, right? So not only for the sake of leaving or running away, nobody nemo decedere, right? Nobody rather departed from the wall. So when you put this all together, you're saying not only all that, but nobody actually left or departed from the wall for the sake of leaving. So the Romans stand their ground, right? Which is this great image coming up of their bravery, their strength, right? Everything's on fire. The world is ending around them, but nobody moves off the wall. And this is Caesar's way of praising his soldiers and showing how great they are and how they stand in the face of danger. Okay, so not only that, right? Not only does nobody leave, but also, right? You have the non modo and sed, right? Going together. So it's really, but also, right? These correlatives. So you have, again, not only did nobody leave, but also not anyone, right? So you have the ne going with quisquam, not even anyone, quidem. Or almost rather, so almost nobody, paene, even looked back, right? Respicere quidem, so almost nobody even looked back to be bothered by this. So they're facing the wall. It's this great image of the soldiers on the wall. They're facing the problem in front of them. They're not even turning around, right? They're fine. Okay, and you have actum omnes acerrime, right? So and then all of them omnes, they pugnarent, they fought acerrime fortissimeque, so most fiercely and most bravely. So in the face of all this, the Romans keep fighting. They don't look back. They're fighting fiercely. They're fighting bravely. Caesar's giving really, really high praise to the men under Cicero and the fight they put up. You can tell he really likes this, and this is what a Roman is supposed to do, right? Your world's on fire. Your stuff is burning. You're being burned. People are throwing arrows at you. Doesn't matter. You stand your ground. And that's what he wants out of the Roman soldiers, okay? So again, it's this really interesting visual part of the narrative, and it always reminds me of something like Lord of the Rings, right? Something out of a movie where you just have massively outnumbered, Romans, right? This part of the siege, right? It's really awesome. But the Romans are outnumbered, they're besieged, their camp is on fire, and they just keep fighting and don't lose focus, right? Even though everything burns around them. And like I said, it could be a little bit of an exaggeration from Caesar saying nobody moved, but it's still there to praise the men. So it almost reminds me of like, the siege of Minas Tirith, right? And Lord of the Rings. Everyone's still fighting, which is kind of cool, right? And it praises the Roman soldiers, it praises their commanders, and you're going to see he's going to get into that in a little bit. But this is kind of the visual you want to have in mind of this epic kind of siege happening. And again, it stands really in contrast to what happened with Sabinus and Cotta, because they don't have the siege. And I think Caesar's saying this is what could have happened if we had better decisions, back at the other camp. Okay, but now we carry on, right? It keeps going. You have hic dies nostris longe gravissimus fuit, sed tamen hunc habuit eventum, ut eo die maximus numerus hostium vulneraretur, atque interficaretur, there we go, ut se sub ipso valo constipaverant recesumque, right? Primis ultimi non dabant. So there's a lot going on here. Again, pronunciation sloppy, but you have hic dies, this day, right? So this fight, this part of the siege, this day was by far the gravissimus, the most serious nostris, for our men, is what he's saying. So this was the tipping point, right? The most dangerous, the most serious. Everything is going badly, but right, nonetheless, tamen, it had, meaning the day had, this eventum, right? Hunc eventum, this outcome. So even though it was really crazy, this is the outcome that happened. That, right, on that day, right, AODA, right, on that day of this siege, the maximus numerus hostium, the greatest number of the enemy, was wounded, vulneraretur, right? They were wounded, and interficaretur, they were killed. So even though it feels like everything is going horribly for the Romans, they persevere, and this is when they do their most damage to the nervi. They kill the most, they defend everything, they wound them. It's a big kind of win and big day for the Romans. Okay, and then you have the second clause here. Since they constipaverant, they had kind of stuffed. I always laugh. My students always translate this as constipated, which is kind of the idea. So have fun with this one. But it kind of blocked up or stuffed up themselves sub ipso valo, under the wall itself. So the Gauls are so anxious to run at the walls that now they're kind of trapped, right? They're stuck under the walls. They thought they were going to push through. They can't, and now they're stuck. So they stuff themselves beneath the wall itself. And the ultimi, so you have to kind of put this into two pieces. You have ultimi and primis, right? Primis are the people in the front. Ultimi are the people in the back. So it's saying the ultimi, the last, meaning the soldiers in the back of the line, they were not giving, non daban, recessum, a retreat, like an opportunity of retreat. An exit is kind of the idea. They weren't giving a retreat to those in the front, primis. So the visual you want to have here is that the men are so packed together they can't move. And this is just some random siege photo I found on Wikipedia of a medieval siege, I'm assuming, but it gives you the idea, right? And again, if you want to go back to Lord of the Rings, there's a great scene there with a similar idea under the gate. But the men are packed together. So if this happens, if you go an all-out charge against a wall and you don't break through, you have a major problem here, right? Now you're sitting there, the Romans are shooting you with their own arrows and things, and you literally can't move. So there's this great way of describing it that Caesar gives, where he says the people in the back are not allowing the people in the front any sort of retreat. They're all getting killed. They're packed too close together. This is not a good time for the Gauls, right? For the nervi. Okay? Then it continues. You have Paulum quidem intermissa flamma et quodam loco turi ad acta et contingente valum tertiae cohortis centuriones ex eo quo staban loco recesserunt, suosque omnes removerunt, nutu vocibusque hostes si introire, velent vocare coiperant. Dot, dot, dot. Whew, lot of line there, okay? But it's saying, indeed, with the fire, the flamma, having been interrupted a little bit, paulum, right? So in other words, the flames kind of pause for a little bit, right? Intermissa flamma. So with the fire having been interrupted a little bit, and in a certain place, right, with the turi adacta, with a tower having been brought up and touching the wall, contingente valum, right? So that one of the siege towers is actually touching the wall, right, of the Roman camp. The centuriones tertiae cohortes, the centurions of the third cohort. So here we have something specific. We don't have their names, but this specific cohort, the third cohort, the centurions do something kind of interesting. So the centurions from this, right, from this place on which they were standing, or where they were standing, they retreated. So you have exeo loco, that's the from this place. So where the siege tower has been brought up and is actually touching the wall, there's a little bit of a gap. The centurions recesserunt, they retreated, right? And they removed, removerunt, omnes suosque, they sent all their men back, okay? So you have a visual of the Romans backing up and the centurions standing there, okay? Then you have nutu vocibusque hostes. So with a nod, nutu, and with words, right, literally with voices, but more with words, these centurions, they coiperant vocare, they began to call the enemy, hostes. So they start taunting them. It's, again, this awesome scene. The centurions are standing on the wall saying, come on up, who wants it first, right? Come on into the camp and see how it goes for you. So it says they began to call the enemy if they wanted to enter, introire velent. So like, if you wish to enter, come on up, buddy, right? Let's see what happens. So they start taunting, right? These centurions start taunting the Nervi, challenging them to come up into the camp. And then we finish the line with this. You have quorum progredi ausus est nemo, right? Of whom, right, meaning of all the enemy, nobody dared to advance, progredi. So you can imagine being the Nervi and seeing these crazy centurions standing there, right, and being like, yeah, I'm not going to be the first one through the wall. You're insane, right? So there's this great scene where there's a gap in the wall, and the centurions are standing there like, come on up, right? Water's fine. Who wants it first? And everyone's kind of afraid of these people, saying like, well, what's about to happen, right? So it's, again, a great scene where the Roman centurions stand out. And even though we don't get their names, it's just another way of Caesar kind of praising his soldiers, their leaders, and how brave they are in the face of all this chaos, okay? And then you end with this line. You have tum ex omni parte lapidibus conjectis deturbati turisque sucensa est, okay? So you have then, from every direction, right, from all parts, they were disturbed by the stones having been thrown down, having been thrown, right? So you have all these the enemies, right there. Everyone's getting attacked. You have thrones being stoned, and the tower, Torisque, sucensa est, it was set on fire. So the Romans are able to destroy the siege tower. They light it on fire. There's stones going everywhere. There's this great opening challenge, and again, there goes the tower. It's lit on fire. So the narrative kind of ends there. But again, you have great scenes packed into this chapter. If you're into like the drama of a siege, and again, maybe it's not for you, but hopefully it is if you're reading Caesar. But this is where Caesar's kind of really drawing out what a siege would feel like, how brave his men are, and all these great things. Okay, so just as we wrap it up, some things to think about when you go through this chapter. You want to notice how fast-paced the dialogue is. So Caesar loves to do this. The narrative mimics the intensity of the fighting. So there's not too many lines that kind of bog you down where you're like, wait, what's going on? He likes to keep it kind of snappy and moving because it mimics how crazy the fighting is, okay? And he also takes a lot to point out that the Nervi, they felt really confident in victory, right? So this is a moment. It's really a tipping point. And I think you can kind of feel that in that line where he says that they think victory's at hand. They lit the fires. They have superior numbers. They're charging, like the Romans are worn out. It's been 7 days of a siege. This is the moment that the Nervi feel like they're about to charge through and win. And it's countered by that fierce resistance of the Roman soldiers. So at the very breaking point, here come the Romans, and they're able to withstand the siege. And that's sort of a dramatic part of the narrative in this particular chapter, right? Then you have the virtus, the courage, the bravery of the Roman soldiers really being highlighted. And again, Caesar's pointing out, we talked about it, nothing distracts them, personal items being lost, fires, stones, wounds, whatever. It's not going to bother these men. right? And as he writes, they don't even look behind him. They're fighting the walls. They don't even look back. This is a way of him pointing out that his army is good. He always takes time to praise his common soldiers. That's part of the propaganda happening here. But he'll always take a minute. He'll never blame them for anything. It's always to say, look how awesome my army is. And this is how he really earns their approval and their respect and their love, right? He's constantly praising them. The other thing that he does is he takes time to praise those centurions, right? We just read the end of it. Their actions on top of the wall, right? This is one of his trademarks too. He does this a lot. There's been a few times we pointed out in the AP curriculum where you see him naming specific centurions, people, leaders, whatever it might be. It's a great way to just, again, send love to his army, his soldiers, and just kind of prop them up. That's something he'll always do. And the last thing, this has nothing really to do with this chapter, but this is setting up the introduction of two of the most famous characters from De Bello Gallico. We'll see them. I believe it's the next chapter. But you're starting to see the individual efforts of the army and what's happening, the drama building, and now we're going to get two awesome characters. So kind of stay tuned for that if you're enjoying reading through this, because they are a really fun part of the siege and kind of all of De Bello Gallico. But again, we're starting to see the action starting, the drama's building, and Caesar's right there to kind of walk you through it and make sure you understand how great the Romans are in fighting off the Nervi. Okay, so hopefully all this made sense. If there's anything you're stuck on or you're not sure of, put it in the comments below. I'm always happy to help. If you think I missed something, that's totally fine. Put it there. But hopefully this gave you a little bit of a guide so that you can work it through on your own too. And if you're reading it and hopefully you watch this and you feel more confident that you're on the right track, that's really what you're after. You want to be able to read this chapter start to finish without too many speed bumps, feeling really good. That's how you know that you're always ready to move on. Okay, let me know if you need any help, but otherwise just keep reading it and good luck.